This presentation is on composing better travel photos. We will be talking about tricks that professional photographers use every day to make their photos look great. We will be discussing what to include, where to place it, and what to avoid.
All right, this is the travel blog I write for, so there's lots of interesting hints on cruising and traveling in general. Here's one on composing better travel photos using the rule of thirds, and that's one thing I'm going to talk about today. The rule of thirds basically means you mentally divide the image in your viewfinder with 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines and try to put your main subject at one of the intersections. It's normally much better than placing them right in the middle. Okay, here's this man in Mexico, and you see him pretty much in the middle in our first photograph, but now I've placed him over on the side at a 1/3 point. And so he's looking into the photograph. His body is faced this way. We can see a little bit of his workshop, so it gives us a sense of place. But right behind his head here is pretty plain, and that's kind of important. You don't want things growing out of someone's head or it to be too distracting. Try to get your subjects facing into rather than out of the photo, because the viewer's eyes here, you travel across here, this looks like it's facing in this way, and then, you can tell we're near a village. And so this is really pretty good. It would have been better had I stood over here and perhaps had these buildings in between. And then this would be looking in, this would be looking in, and we'd all be looking at these buildings. So it's a matter of walking around your subject. Keep clicking away. I mean, I will take 5 to 20 images of one subject. You just have to stand up, sit down, kneel down, walk around, and work your subject. You can do it within 2 minutes. If you first look at your subject and think about what's there and what you want to try to accomplish. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, this is a lovely lady on the beach in Aruba. You see she's at approximately 1/3 point. She's facing into the photograph, and so as we're looking at it, we're going into rather than out of the photograph, and we have a sense of place. Okay, now there are times when placing your subject right in the middle makes sense. It often emphasizes the subject and makes them appear bigger and bolder and stronger. And so here we have this boy in Rabaul in New Guinea, and he's there being dominant. He's got his sign in the background, and he becomes a bit more imposing by placing him directly in the middle. In with this Maori warrior in New Zealand. We've got sculptures in the background, a little bit spooky looking, and he's there being big and bold right in the middle. Now, in this photograph, you see here on this side, we've got the Colosseum. So in the context of modern Rome, the Colosseum really appears kind of crumbling. And you see the street, and we have this lamppost that kind of frames this side. And so this is how it looks in modern day. But if we were to walk around and place the Colosseum directly in the center, it just looks a little stronger and bolder. So it depends on what you're going for. This was taken in a museum, and when you're doing a single object like this, there's nothing really in the background. Placing it directly in the middle is a fine place. Now perhaps if there were other artifacts from that era that didn't clutter up the scene too much but kind of added to the message, then that would have been fine. But here we get a nice view of this vase directly in the center. Consider framing. And so here we have a subject, and it's framed by this doorway, and we can kind of see through there and we get a sense of place of where he is. So this works out well as a composition. Now we're going to talk about what's in the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. So you see this lovely family. They're here in the foreground, and we have them framed by the curtain here, and they're in some kind of vehicle, and they're here in Nicaragua, and we get a sense of place in the background. And it's really not, it doesn't clutter it up too much, it just kind of adds a sense of place. So it helps tell a story about where they are. Okay, these two boys in New Guinea. So we see they're standing here on the sand and there's rocks, and I moved around them quite a bit to manage to get the volcano's plume here not growing out of one of their heads. So by placing it here, it kind of adds a nice balance. Okay, this is a somewhat plain background, but it gives a sense of place again. So here we are on the street, and someone wants their picture taken with the dancers, but we have way too much. Like, these people aren't relevant at all to our message. But the buildings do kind of tell a little bit of a story about where we are. And so in this situation, you can either zoom in to get rid of what's around, or later, when you've uploaded this to your computer, or often in your camera, whether you're using your smartphone or a tablet, there's often some software to help you crop the picture, meaning get rid of some things around the edge. And so here, by cropping them up, those other figures out and leaving some of the building, we have a much better photograph. Consider having 1, 2, 3, or how many figures or objects, animals, plants, whatever you're taking, should you have in one picture at a time. So here we have a cluster of children in Cozumel, and some of them look a little more interesting than others. And so I'm going to crop this. Anybody tell me which ones they would eliminate, which ones they would keep in? Take the one off on the left, and over here, this guy. This is what I decided to do. I liked these three. They were looking at me. Their face was calm. As opposed to the others, they're just kind of there tentatively. I take a lot of photographs of children, as you will find as you go through these lectures. And controlling them is an issue. And I talk about that in the Capturing a Travel Destination. I talk more about how to manage groups of children so that you can get decent photographs. And so here, to me, they're just kind of squirming in there, trying to get in the picture, where these are just there and they're calm. And so this is the composition that I chose. Exactly. You see there's not the distraction up here. I got rid of this right here by cloning this, putting what's in the background on here. I did it in Photoshop. And there's lots of different software programs. And in my photo editing lecture, I talk about them and do some demonstrations and try to show you how to do that. I was able to get rid of some distracting things in the background here to make what I think a much stronger photograph. Okay, so here we have three bird of paradise. It's just a nice movement, a nice flow from one to the other. This is on Christmas Island. So these three girls were just there in this building. They're being framed very nicely by the wood in the building. And you have one large belt by two smaller ones. So often an uneven number in design works better. So having 1, 3, 5 often is a better choice. Okay, these were a group of musicians on Bora Bora. And I chose these three to be in this photograph. But you can see there's some strong images. I mean, her by herself is really quite interesting. And even her by herself could be quite interesting. Which later you could crop the others out. Or you could have zoomed right in and got her as a separate shot. Okay, now sometimes pairs, too, can be very effective. All right, in this photograph, this was in Lima, Peru, and this was a pair, a dancing couple, and so having them together was quite appropriate. And this was a pair of sisters I found on the road in Jamaica. And they're both just kind of protecting each other, standing there, and I thought they made a nice pair. So sometimes you can tell a story by using just two. This was taken at a county fair in Elmont, Michigan. What was it you told me about this picture?
I don't remember.
Oh, this is my sister Kathy. She's cruising with me. And I said this to her, and she said, oh, that's you and I on our cruise.
Oh, that's right. That's the pygmy. I can see it better there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's us on a cruise.
I don't take a lot of photographs of the animals, so I'm trying to stretch and try to take, expand my repertoire of what I take pictures of. And the two laying there, I thought, told the story with their nose in the bowl. And they were in a pen, and I just leaned over and took their picture. And a nice aspect is you have the metal railings all pointing to our focal point right here, and it's not directly in the center. Okay, here's a nice couple in Tahiti at the market. They make a nice pair, kind of balanced by this over here, so you can kind of tell they might be shopping. And I use this in my photo editing lecture. There was a distracting window up here, and there was something, let's go back here. There was something on the floor down here that I was able to get rid of. Try different angles and perspectives. You see here, he had to get down low. We're obviously at a fish market, and so by emphasizing that fish in the front, we've created a little more interest. So here's looking down the street, and so we have another different angle. Try taking things from above, below, from the side. You have to walk around and think about different angles. Okay, this is a vineyard in New Zealand, and got right down at the level of the grapes, okay, right in the vine to take this picture. This was a boy, San Blas, near Panama. Wonderful kid. He was willing to stand here, stand there. He loved it. Loved the attention. So I was able to get right down on his eye level. He's got a nice contrast of the color. He was relaxed. You can have a non-distracting background. Nice blinds coming through to keep us in the picture. All right, so look for patterns. Sometimes they are interesting, and you may get into taking patterns and textures. You need to find what you're interested in. Once you figure out what you want to take a picture of, what you're looking for, what images you want to capture, then you'll know what to take a picture of. You won't just snap and then, okay, I've got 1,000 pictures of Norway. Well, what are you going to do with them, But if you get an idea ahead of time of just what you want to capture and what you're looking for, then you will know what to take a picture of. And so consider different options. Certainly in buildings, there are interesting patterns. This is on the beach in Aruba. You can see the movement that the eye goes through and going across here, even though it's very repetitive. Okay, this was in Bruges, Belgium, and the viewer's eye comes around here, bounces around this way, comes up here, comes back here, goes through the lines, and so there's reasons for the viewer to stay in this photograph. It has an interesting movement. All right, I almost tossed this photograph out or deleted it from my computer because there's a reflection in here. We're on a bus, but I started to like this reflection. This actually is my mother here. You might be able to see it a little bit better on one of the TV monitors. But it helped remind me of where we are and who I was with and what we were doing. And there's a nice curve to this, and so we're kind of moving along the bus with these people and looking, out. We were obviously on a bus tour. Okay, think about symmetry. So here we have formal symmetry. One half is a mirror reflection of the other half. Sometimes that can be very interesting in a building. This is taken at the back of St. Paul de Vence in France. Lots of texture. And certainly that was a big theme in Norway, the textures around. I mean, I was amazed. The street and the buildings and, in the plants. It was very rich in texture wherever you looked. Okay, this photograph certainly has a lot of texture. You see the different shapes. We start here, we travel around, and then we hop from one rooftop to the other, and then we go from one island to the other. And so there's good contrast. We have small and we have large. And we have a means to move around within the photograph. So it captures the viewer's attention for a few more seconds. Okay, depth of field. This is in St. Paul de Vence also. You see what is in focus. From the front, the foreground, all the way to the background, you would say this has good depth of field because it is all in focus. And sometimes that's what you want. If we say we have a shallow depth of field, it means not everything is in focus. Maybe something in the background or something in the foreground. And so throughout the lectures, I'm going to be talking a lot about the light and also the focus and the composition. So those are three really important things. In this situation, I wanted everything to be in focus. But in this situation, it was nice to have a shallow depth of field, to have the bird in focus, but the background to be a little fuzzy. All right, still was enough to tell you where he was and give a sense of place, but having isolated subjects in focus creates an emphasis on them and reduces some of the clutter in the background by having it be fuzzy. Now on your cameras you may have a portrait setting. Okay, and what that is, it will put your subject in focus but blur the background without you having to think too much about apertures and all of that. All right, in the first photograph you wouldn't put that on the portrait setting because it would choose whatever was being metered the most, put that in focus and have other things be blurry. So when you're taking pictures of people, animals, and you really want to put the emphasis on them, you might try the portrait setting on your camera. Okay, color is certainly an interesting thing, and you may get into photographing things that have vivid colors in them. Okay, this is in Jamaica, and color is certainly an important aspect of this photograph. Had the material hanging there, had it been all white, or all black, or all gray, or even all red, it would perhaps be less interesting. And so I was attracted to this because of the color. And also it has nice texture. We've got wood and grass and smooth cloth and a ragged roof. And so it has some things that are pretty interesting. We've got a roof line going across this way, but then this is going up and down, this is going across, and so the eye is led around this photograph. Okay, certainly color is a nice aspect of this one also. We have great contrast in the yellows and the orange and then the green. It adds a different texture. See see the possibilities. You might take a second or two to just look at what's in front of you and figure out what about that scene appeals to you. What would you like to emphasize? And so I was at a school on Christmas Island. These kids are wandering all around. I've got several instances of them in other photographs, how I was able to get some decent photographs in that scene. But what I really liked was these two women. And this was just kind of a blank area. This became overexposed because in photographing this, I aimed my camera to get a good exposure on the two women, knowing that the very bright light in the background there was going to affect the exposure, how light or how dark. And so in composing this, I took my viewfinder and I tilted it down a little bit so that when I metered the light, this was not in the viewfinder. I may have pointed it down here. I wouldn't have wanted it on this white because that is in contrast to the rest. So I probably metered right on this woman, meaning you might have a square in the middle of your viewfinder, or you might have several dots. And so I put the center right here, held the shutter button halfway down, kept my finger on the button, and then recomposed. So I got this in the picture, and then press the button all the way down. It won't re-meter the light, and so it will disregard the bright light in the background. So I was able to get this in the photograph, but have decent lighting for the women, all right, because I knew I was going to mess with this later. I was able to get a nice photograph of her by cropping. It has nice texture in the background. I was even able to get some detail in those trees because I later in software took the trees. I actually took another photograph where I metered those trees. I stood and let that be right in the center, took the photograph. So then I had a good exposure for those trees. And later in software, cut out that square from where the trees were metered correctly and pasted it in her picture. So I was able to get a decent exposure on both parts of the picture. This woman by herself really made a nice photograph also. You can study art, study paintings for composition. You can look on TV screens. Notice when someone is being interviewed, normally they're not right in the center. They're normally off to the side, looking in. And so here's a painting. You see her body is facing more into the photograph, but she's looking out. And so that conveys an attitude. And so you see her, here this is in sound gloss, her body is facing out, but then she's turning back. And that conveys a little bit of emotion. So this happens to be my son. He was at NASA in Houston, Texas. And you see he's there in the cockpit just ready to go, but it's turning around, giving us the signal. So you have a little bit of action there. So here we have this painting by Degas. We have this nice empty space, so we are invited into this painting. We have a place to stand and be there with the ballerinas. And then we go from one to the other. Back here, we're led by these lines to the back. So this empty space helps invite the viewer in. And this also, okay, this was in Dubai. And he's sitting here on a ferry, and we see the buildings in the background. But I like this photograph a little better because we're kind of invited to be in the photograph also. We can sort of see ourselves sitting there with him on the ferry. And he's still looking into the photograph. Now, really need to get rid of this line growing out of his shoulder there. And that can be easily done in software. So if you have any questions or comments as we go along, if it relates to generally what we're talking about and you think it would be of general interest to the group, that's fine. You can. So, is it in portrait mode? No. No, it was just taken probably on automatic. I probably metered the light down a little bit first to get a better exposure on him, and then recomposed because the background is so light. He would have been rather dark. This is in Hong Kong. We're traveling along the water, and we see the shoreline here. So we're invited in. This is in Tahiti. We see the pond, and then we come to the bridge. Okay, the same here in this woman in Aruba. This is kind of distracting, but by cropping that out, giving us the beach, we can see us walking towards her on the beach. Think about capturing emotion. So this young man in Cozumel, you know, okay, he's willing to stand in front of this nice textured purple wall for me, but he's telling me he's not completely happy with the situation. And this little girl in Vietnam, she was not completely happy with the situation either. Whether it was me or her day, but I thought it made an interesting photograph. See, she's facing out and then turning back in. Okay, these guys, I'll show you some other things in the Capturing a Travel Destination presentation about how I was able to manage these children. But he was obviously the leader, and I needed to take a picture of him, give him attention before I could take a picture of anyone else. You obviously see, you know, he wants, you know, his respect there. Okay, in this photograph, the bottom's cut off a little bit, but playfully kind of saying, well, you better hop on the back because I'm leaving. You know, he's kind of facing out of the photograph, but it tells you a little different story than if he was just entering the photograph. Go from showing activity to try to capture motion. And so here's a farmer in Vietnam. Okay, so he's out plowing his field. It's a reasonable photograph. But then you see this. Okay, this is not my photograph, the second one. You could go online and put in motion photography, and you see some amazing things that I couldn't even, it's not something I'm interested in, or probably, you know, could do without a lot of research and work. But this captures motion, and how much more vibrant and interesting that photograph is than my little puny one there in the corner. All right, so you want to make your travel photos look great. We've talked about all these things here on the left. And then on the right, we've talked about where to place it. A 1/3 position, in the middle, facing in, facing out, or at an angle. And we talked about some things to avoid. Distracting backgrounds, clutter, too much in one place.